All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. There will be late people, I know, but I'll keep an eye on the room and admit everybody who comes. So thank you all for coming this evening. I'm Valerie Nye. I'm the library director here at Santa Fe Community College, and I'm grateful that Austin has agreed to read for us, and I'm really grateful that each one of you is here this evening. As Austin and I were preparing for the event this evening, Austin asked me if there was anything I wanted to say about the Santa Fe Community College Library. And as I was considering what to say about the library, I realized I wanted to take just a moment to talk about what libraries across the country are dealing with in 2023, because our profession has had a really difficult year. Librarians, especially people who work in school and public libraries, are encountering a lot of challenges to speech, challenges to books, and challenges to programming. Libraries across the country, and even some in New Mexico, have had groups come to their doorsteps demanding that books be removed from their collection. These groups are targeting LGBTQIA materials and materials that support people of color. Librarians are encountering hatred and violence because we are engaging in the important work that supports our diverse communities. And librarians are not bending to the will of these small, vocal, and sometimes violent groups. We want to make sure that our libraries represent the community and that everybody can see themselves in the books and materials that we have for research in our libraries. My librarian colleagues have most vigilantly been fighting in the last 2 years. Some have lost their jobs defending intellectual freedom and freedom of speech, and librarians have had their lives threatened, and some of my colleagues in other states have felt so unsafe that they have left the jobs they love because they fear for the lives of themselves or their families. I don't like that we are having to deal with these difficult situations, but I'm grateful for their work and grateful to count many of these heroes as my friends and colleagues. Librarians value diversity and work to reflect the multiple voices and life experiences in our community. We defend the rights of all individuals to use libraries. We protect privacy. We connect people with ideas. And we do all of this in support of our democratic society where people have an opportunity to learn throughout their lives. For some, libraries are their community college. So I'm especially grateful for the people who support libraries today by using them. And I'm really grateful to people like Austin who want to share creative work and engage us in thoughtful conversation. So thank you, Austin, for bringing us together tonight. For those of you who don't know Austin Eichelberger, Austin is an associate professor of English and writing at Santa Fe Community College. He completed his MA at Longwood University in Virginia in 2009 and his MFA in fiction at the Institute of American Indian Arts in 2018. Austin is originally from the Appalachian region of Virginia. He's a creative consultant and visual artist in Santa Fe, and he's published over 80 pieces of creative writing. He was a finalist in 2016 for the Larry Brown Short Story Award, and in 2017 he was nominated for the prestigious Pushcart Prize. For those of you who don't know Austin or haven't worked with him, I encourage you to get to know him. He's a creative force and an amazingly supportive colleague. I'm so grateful Austin is at SFCC, and I'm honored to introduce his reading this evening. So to give you all just a brief explanation of how tonight is going to run, Austin has some information to share about the creative writing program at SFCC, and then he'll read from his novel. We will then have a very, very short break and resume our discussion with question and answers afterwards. So if you have questions for Austin as he's reading, or if things occur to you as the evening is going on, you can put them in the chat and I will make sure Austin either sees the questions or hears them. So with that, I will hand things over to Austin. Please help me welcome Austin.
Thank you so much, Val. I appreciate you a lot. And Val is library director at SFCC, and I've worked with her at other schools, and I value her as a colleague and a friend, and I'm really happy to be here. So thank you, Val. Let's see, there are a few things that I wanted to share. Ooh, sorry, because I've switched windows. Okay. This reading is brought to you tonight by the Santa Fe Community College Library and Creative Writing Program. We are thrilled to have you join us for this special reading event, and we hope you will come back to celebrate the power of words and storytelling at our future events. Tonight's gathering, in addition to being a reading, is an invitation to those who have passion for the written word. If you've ever dreamed of becoming a writer, whether you'd like to craft compelling fiction, pen evocative poetry, or explore the world of nonfiction, SFCC's doors are wide open and we are awaiting your arrival. The SFCC Creative Writing Program nurtures aspiring writers, providing them with the tools, guidance, and inspiration to take their creative endeavors to new heights. We believe that writing is not only a useful and practical skill, but an art form that has the potential to transform lives and connect people across time and space. SFCC's Creative Writing Program is dedicated to your development as a writer, a reader, and a member of a creative community. Our faculty are published authors and professional editors, and our course offerings include a multi-genre workshop and an internship with the Santa Fe Literary Review, SFCC's in-print literary journal. Related degree and certificate requirements include opportunities to intern with local magazines, newspapers, and publishing houses, to explore the world of book arts, and to hone screenwriting skills. Students work closely with professors and peers to develop, revise, and publish creative and academic writing in a range of genres and formats. In our program, students can earn a certificate or an associate's degree in English language creative writing. Upon completion, you'll have gained the skills and experience to submit a manuscript for publication, pursue a career in editing, or continue your studies in creative writing. You can also now complete the entire program online. Please see the chat for links to our program website, where you can see our course offerings for spring 2024, explore the program requirements, find information about the Santa Fe Literary Review, and the Kate Besser Awards, SFCC's very own writing award. For those of you considering your own creative journey, we encourage you to get in touch and ask us any questions you have about the program. Whether you're an experienced writer looking to take a single course or a complete novice ready to explore your creative potential, we have classes and resources for you. At the Santa Fe Community College Creative Writing Program, we believe that everyone has a story and every story is worth sharing. Tell us yours. And before we begin, I would also like to read a land acknowledgement. Santa Fe Community College acknowledges that the lands beneath the college are unceded sovereign lands of the Pueblo nations of Tesuque, Nambe, Pohaque, San Ildefonso, Okeowinge, Cochiti, Kiwa, San Felipe, Santa Ana, Zia, and Jemez, and that New Mexico's indigenous peoples, their governance, cultures, languages, and religions have been systematically attacked over centuries of settler colonial erasure. SFCC recognizes and respects indigenous peoples as the original and current stewards of the land where we learn, work, and grow. Okay. So a few tiny little prefaces to my work. I have family here tonight. Hello, family. Thank you for being here. And this book deals with family, but the book does not deal with my family. So please do not mistake me for the main character. These things did not happen to me. And so I read one of the scenes that I'll read you tonight at my MFA reading, and I had someone come up to me afterward and go, "Your family is crazy." And I was like, "Oh, no, please don't think that." So please don't make the mistake of mistaking this for memoir or autofiction. It is not. And a trigger warning, just a quick trigger warning for anybody. There is a description of a scene of suicide in here. It's not very long and it's not very in depth, but just so you're aware. So what I'm going to do tonight, I'm going to read you the prologue, and then I'm going to read you a section from a little bit deeper in the novel, and I'll give you just a little information before I give you that one to catch you up. But my novel is called The Longdream, and so we'll start. Prologue. The fall could have killed me. That rattlesnake could have bitten me. I could have been plucked from the street as a kid, or messed with the wrong guy at a bar while blackout, listened when I told myself I wanted to die. So much could have kept me from being here and meeting Carmine, from his cloudy smile, his dark pearl skin. "Where's your mind?" Carmine asked from the driver's seat of his SUV. I shifted my legs and my shin banged against the dashboard. I don't know. I leaned toward the reflection of my unshaven face in the passenger window and into the intense morning light of New Mexico's northern desert. Reflected behind me, Carmine nodded, brown eyes shining yellow and black hair glinting navy. Beyond his image and all around us, sandstone mesas striped rainbows of red and gold punctuated flats where ancient water had flowed. shaping the land before it rose up. Sparks of fuchsia from flowering cacti caught the light amid dark green scrub brush and the reaching tips of sparse prairie grasses. Goodbye, desert, I said as I thought it, not meaning to speak aloud. My brittle vision smudged the vast layers of plateaus with the snowy peaks that faded lavender in the distance, blended them into the gradient of blue above, sprinkled with far-off clouds. The rush of color and sun made my eyes water and my dry throat tighten. Carmine must have heard me. His reflection raised an eyebrow. Do you mind if we listen to music? We don't have to talk. The landscape righted itself when I heard Carmine's voice, edges sharp, sky and sand far apart and gleaming. I turned from the window. I don't mind music. I plugged the stereo cord into my phone and swiped through albums I'd bought at his suggestion. I'm not sure why, but I'm not upset about anything that happened this weekend. My heart punched into my lungs, knocking my breath short. Even kissing you. I really like you, and I love being around you, meeting your friends, and I let out a breath that felt like it filled my whole body, but turned out to be barely a gasp. Why am I still talking? Spanish guitars lit up the car. Carmine nodded at the radio. Good choice, and thanks. I'm glad we met. He smiled over at me. I've been wanting to kiss you. I laughed and sat forward to catch his eyes. I could tell. My chest went eerily still as my heart leapt. If we hadn't met, I'm not even sure I'd be alive. I set my elbow on the edge of the window and looked out at the desert. You've changed my whole life. Knowing you has. I rubbed my thumb across my dry lips. This might sound stupid, but beneath my skin, there's an animal whose snarl glares white. But when you're around, it's like he's a puppy, or you help me see he doesn't mean to be bad. He's just scared. Something. The beast that lived in my guts stirred when I mentioned it aloud, then turned circles on itself and resettled. Like the glare is really a glow if I let my eyes adjust. I prodded the back of my head gently with my fingertips as I caught a tangy whiff of hangover sweat. I said, feels like falling from my apartment balcony was a dream from another lifetime, even though it only happened... How long ago? Has it been weeks or months since Carmine found me on the sidewalk and took me on that surreal hospital visit? I searched my memory for the last time I had seen a calendar or kept track of days of the week and glanced at the digital clock on the dashboard. At first, I saw 8888 flashing at me in red, but I blinked and it clearly showed 10:32 in sun-muted green. I shook my head and leaned down to unzip the backpack between my calves. Over my shoulder, Carmine said, "What happened when?" I pulled out my sketchbook from the backpack and centered it on my lap as I sat up. Never mind, it wasn't important. A burp bubbled up from my stomach. He smiled and tapped on the steering wheel in time with the music's quick percussion. I opened the sketchbook across my lap and flipped through pages of dreams knotted to tangled memories, stopping when I reached a portrait I had last touched a few days before we came on this trip. In the drawing, dark iridescent feathers shaded Carmine's strong neck and honey eyes, then echoed off his face into the background like open wings. I like that one, he said. He was smiling from the corner of his eye and moving his head to the music. It still needs work. I turned back a few pages to a plan for a painting of the geography of a man's body under plum-colored silk. This is what I want to work on, but big canvases are expensive. I just might use paper instead. The veiled figure I'd sketched while looking at Carmine under his sheets shuddered and shifted on the page before me. I leaned into the image, but it had gone still. I flipped to a page of quick sketches of Carmine playing video games and reading in the sunlight of the living room. I'd filled in specific details on each, the hands on this one, his eyes and smile here, his clavicles and arms and a take top, but I'd left the rest of them hazy, like figures half emerged from stone. The page after was a nude man under the moon with stars riddling his hair that I'd drawn soon after moving in with Carmine, after Laura gave me the divorce papers. Heat slipped over my face and down my neck as I thought about asking Carmine if he'd pose for that drawing so I could get the musculature right. Glimpses of him undressing filled my mind, and the man on the page winked at me, his thick lashes slowly separating as I watched. My lungs emptied and I clapped the sketchbook closed, spun the cap off the water bottle from my backpack. I chugged half of it, but my throat was still cracked, arid soil. The guitars on the stereo rippled in my ears, and the desert brightened as if a cloud had passed from the sun, though when I looked up, the clear blue above showed no reason for the change. I rubbed my knuckles into my closed eyes until I saw dark rainbows, and when I looked again, the world was neon and trembling, holding in a shiver. Carmine stopped bouncing his head. You okay? Mm-hmm. I gulped down more water. I'm okay. It sounded more like a question than a statement, even to me, but I smiled and turned to the window like I hadn't noticed, my heart skipping double beats. The rhythm in my chest the rhythm in my chest lifted to a dark colored octave, filled the expanse of desert around me with the rich pulse that must have originated in the belly of the earth itself. I folded my fingertips into my palms, and the soft, cool spots contrasted every other part of me. You sure you're okay? Carmine had an eyebrow up as sunlight played across the stubble beneath his cheekbones. Sorry, fine. I'm fine. I took a deep breath, thinking, I guess. My shoulders and neck went feverish as a gravelly woman's voice emerged from the speakers and overtook the music, but she didn't match the song, threw everything off. My guts distorted and spots like lightning bugs blinked in my vision. Is this my hangover? As the woman's voice became louder, more familiar, merged with my new inner beat, my chaotic heart. Do you hear that? My voice sounded like it hadn't come from inside me, and my head swam as I rocked toward the window. The guitar's warped and copper spread across my tongue, a sharp smell of percussion filling the air. I swung my head in Carmine's direction, breath constricted, vision upended like water in a shaken glass. Carmine? He didn't react as the dazzling landscape behind him blurred like spilled gasoline, his features unsteady. His skin tone shifted and clouds hazed his eyes, obscuring him like I should have always known they would. Carmine, do you hear me? I reached over and squeezed his bare forearm. Carmine jolted, his SUV swerving viciously into the other lane and back. He looked at my hand, then at my face, and screamed, Darren! But his voice crackled with shiny panic on the R's while the woman's singing got closer, hoarser like she was crying, and the guitars and engine were gone, every sound but her replaced by the earth's thrum. Carmine, eyes wide and red-rimmed, clawed at the air where he should have grabbed my shoulder, my knee, his fingers searching for my cheek while his other hand gripped the steering wheel so hard I could see every bone and tendon. The raucous symphony that had haunted me since I fell from my second-story apartment balcony then tuned up. The low squeal and skull-trembling bass notes, the static that gripped outside sounds, all swelling together, and this woman called through all of it, drowned out Carmine and tugged at my hands and chest, yanked me out of the car, and as I hovered for half a second, the northern New Mexico desert was nothing more than an unfinished painting from some postcard I'd seen as a kid. Details off, colors unblended, pencils still showing at the edges. Through the closed window, I strained to reach Carmine's hand, grasping over the passenger seat. And then I was lying back like I was in a lounge chair, and my eyelids were ripping through crust, gluing them together as I thought, but I am already awake. Fuzzy light jabbed into my brain like I'd held my swollen eyes closed for days, maybe months or my whole life, and I struggled to blink the world into focus through a veil of mucus as the erratic symphony in my head synced up to the EKG, a ventilator, some large gray machines I didn't recognize, oxygen tubes whistling in my nostrils, and the woman's voice, which I heard clearly then, recognized in my memory, the echo after I took the divorce papers, a beat I had been tapping out and humming as if the words were lost, rose from Laura, her head on my chest and her blonde hair longer, roots now mousy brown. As if from above, I saw my wife's sickly thin hands folded over my heart and heard her sobs heaving a dirge. Please come back, Darren. Please come back to me. So that was the prologue. And to fill you in, to contextualize that a little bit, oh, thank you. But you still have more coming. You know, you could save your applause. I shouldn't say that. I should take all the applause I can get. Darren was in a coma. And that section I just read was him waking up from the coma dream. So it was the reality of the dream that he had been in sort of breaking down and leading to a few things like synesthesia and these sort of warped images where he recognizes that he's not looking at what's real. And then he wakes up in the hospital. But I wanted to fast forward a little bit. So this is after a day in the hospital. He's been in the hospital for one day. And you'll hear the term Longdream in this section, which is the title of the book. That's a word I made up. It is a word that Darren made up. because when he first wakes up, coma triggers him and sends him into flashbacks from his coma. So he doesn't like that word, so he tries to avoid it. So he uses the word Longdream. And just so you have a little more context, he was in a coma for 28 days. So he was out for a while and experienced some muscle atrophy and things like that. Okay. The first few nights, in the blinking light of the EKG and the mighty hum of the hospital outside his door, Darren couldn't fall asleep unless he took the tiny pills the nurses promised would suppress his dreams, and even then, his eyelids fluttered whenever a shoe squeaked in the hallway. But Darren discovered the pills dampened his mental images of mangled metal on the side of I-25, New Mexico sunsets shimmering red and wet, other stories winding through his imagination of horrific ends that Carmine met in the desert. Though they also resurfaced other, older parts of his life, Darren swallowed each tablet eagerly. The day after he woke up, while he was alone after, I am so sorry, that just botched that sentence completely. The day after he woke up, while Laura was out getting lunch, he was overtaken by a waking dream that flowed in with a headache and was immersive as the Longdream. He tried to stay still to avoid the tearing sensation in his muscles when he moved too quickly, but the vision dragged him under and instinct took over as Darren emerged back into the hospital room in gasps, disoriented and shocked, his mind filled with Carmine, the glowing sheen of Carmine's dark skin, lines of his strong neck and jaw, cloudy light of his brown eyes, baritone voice by Darren's ear as scenes from their time together filled the dull hospital room and memories of Carmine's firm hands swam across Darren's skin. Darren let his guts twist and roll as he held on to Carmine long as he could, his fists clenched and breath held, hoping for the man he loved to interrupt him by walking into the room wearing a hospital gown and a smile. After the episode ebbed, Darren dozed out of exhaustion, his muscles aching even as they relaxed. His mother came into the room so quietly he didn't hear her. The lights left off. In the worn chair by his hospital bed, she watched his face as he rested, khaki jacket on her rigid shoulders and purse in hand for a long, quiet while. Thirsty, Darren opened his eyes, waited for his blurry vision to focus in the early afternoon light until he saw her beside the bed. A tight smile pulled down the corners of her eyes. "Hello," she said. "I wanted to see you." She blinked a few times. It's felt longer than 17 years since we last spoke. Darren had always known his mom to be nervous as a small bird. Plans shifting or a disrupted phone call were sometimes upsetting enough for her to complain about for a week, let alone ruin her day. Darren's childhood memories were crowded with both her anxious love and her utter joy, when so much light filled the room that he couldn't see the rest of the world, nothing in his life except that happy, fleeting present. But the older he had gotten, the clearer Darren had seen that his mother could be unpredictable, her emotions overflowing and flooding the house, the double-sided razor of her tongue and wit outfoxing people before anyone had realized she was angry. But his mom's deep sensitivity also extended the other direction, to thoughtful gifts and laughing hugs and favorite homemade meals and beyond, to a sweetness that thickened into syrup, a welcoming warmth that Darren could feel wrap him up and smother him if he didn't sometimes get away to the outside world. Since his dad's death, thoughts of Darren's childhood and family were like one of Laura's faceted crystals. A memory could be a portal of darkness from one angle, a mirror from another, the next second, a spark of color that can't be found again. Now, in the shadowed hospital room, Darren recognized a sad calm in his mother that reminded him of high school and his father's death, a deeply familiar unease he hadn't felt so close for almost a decade. She set her purse on the floor. "We don't have to talk about what happened. I don't even remember. You left so long ago." She shrugged her jacket off into the seat behind her and folded her hands in her lap. "My heart jumped when I saw your number on my phone a month ago. I thought you were getting in touch to apologize or visit, but Laura was crying when I answered the phone. I laid down on the kitchen floor and it was 10 minutes before she calmed down enough to tell me what happened, that you were alive and I needed to come out." She lifted her hands, then resettled them in the same position. "Your sister flew to Virginia and we both came here 2 days after Laura called, while her family was still here. Nice people. We had a layover on our way, so Mare and I got dinner and watched the commuters run for their gates. She looked over her shoulder as if she heard the door opening. When we got on our flight, we had to trade seats with a family that didn't want to move, but they did once I told them why we were flying. She paused as if Darren had spoken, though he only nodded stiffly along. But there was no turbulence, and the stewardesses gave me 2 extra pillows and a bottle of wine between my pretzels and peanuts. Mare didn't even see it. She reached for her purse. Darren's voice was still half asleep. I think you're supposed to call them flight attendants. He reached for the water on the tray above the bed, stretched too far, and grunted. She handed the cup of water to him, then twisted the cap from the small green bottle in her other hand. I don't think any of them were in earshot. She gave a weak smile. Darren cocked his head to the side and lifted his other hand to support the small cup. He had never known his mom to purposefully open up very much, had gotten to know her through her constant worry and occasional outbursts, financial posturing and neighbor envy, her soft, sensitive heart, and the deliberate care she could give when she felt good enough to. The years since they'd seen each other last, for Darren's father's funeral, had added cynical lines around her mouth and eyes, tension tempering the layers of the woman he remembered, the sweetness and darkness of the mother he thought he knew. Do I know her? You'll be out of here in no time. Mom lifted the wine bottle to her lips and air burbled in as she drank. I know. I'm just getting used to everything again. He swallowed down a wince with a sip of water as he tilted his head back and heard a pop in his neck. Well, don't. You'll be back to new, better than before. I made the doctors promise. She sipped the wine. I'll deal. He tried to keep steady as he stretched his arms forward to set the cup down on the tray, but his hands shook and he spilled a tiny puddle. I'm still, his voice crumpled as his fingers curled and grasped at the air between them, searching for what he meant. Still, you don't have to explain, Mom said, waving her empty hand through the air between them. I've been an absolute mess. She turned the tiny wine bottle between her fingers, studying it. When Laura told me, I couldn't understand what she said at first. Tears sank down her cheeks, but she made no move to wipe them away as she looked back to Darren, her chin trembling. I can't lose you too. On the damp afternoon of November 14th, alone in the house where Darren grew up, Darren's dad twisted a noose from a sheet stripped from the guest bed and hung himself off the sturdy dining room fan. Darren's mom had been chairing a book club 2 houses down, his cancer a secret even from her, and Darren and Meredith were both attending classes at colleges in different states. Their father had wrapped one corner smoothly over his head and tucked it neatly into the back, so, as his meticulous notes explained, whoever found him wouldn't have to see his face. When he toppled the folding stepladder with his feet, the fitted sheet went taut with a 47-year-old, 178-pound man hanging 5 feet 10 inches, his bare toes almost grazing the upended stepladder as his body made gentle circles beneath his fan's spinning blades. The last thing he did before adorning his neck with the knotted sheet was call 911 and ask for an ambulance because someone is dying. After the burial in the cemetery by the funeral home, Darren had walked down the street with Mom and Meredith to his childhood home, past the park and the deli, places etched with imprints of the man they'd all lost, all of them silent. Darren stared at the cracked sidewalk and thought of the beginning of his sophomore year a few months before, and how wide open with possibility the world had felt then, how flat and muted it felt the morning of his dad's funeral. After wordlessly unlocking the door to the kitchen, Mom had dropped her winter coat on the kitchen table as she passed and pulled the gin down from the top of the refrigerator. Darren felt his face contort. What are you doing with that? She turned to him, her gaze down and thin hand gripping the neck of the large bottle. It helps. She teetered as she slid off her shoes. Are you drunk? Darren had leaned on the kitchen counter as his heart gained speed. Mom would get the giggles after a single glass of wine at the holidays, but that day she'd only heaved sighs and responded to everyone like she hadn't heard what they'd said. It calmed me down. I was shaking too badly this morning to see anyone. Your Uncle Gene suggested a drink. Her heavy bracelets clacked together as gin dribbled from the bottle into a short glass that refracted spots of light onto the dappled laminate counter. I understand how you feel, Mom, but don't lecture me. She turned to Darren, the tumbler in one loose fist. You could never understand how I feel. Darren rolled his lips between his teeth and let out a slow breath. Okay, Mom, that might be a little harsh. Is it? I've been biting my tongue, but I was surprised you even came with us the way you treated your father and I these last few years. Her pouring hand resumed, steady now, and the soft blue gin sloshed generously into the clear glass. Meredith had been pretending not to pay attention while assembling a bologna sandwich, but her eyes went wide. Mom, that's not. Oh, shut up, Meredith. Mom lifted her glass and drank it empty. I don't need your fucking help. Darren reached out for the bottle in his mom's hand, but she snatched it away. You mean while I've been in college? In Colorado? On the other side of the country? Mom glared at him. Darren had agreed when Meredith pleaded with him to not argue with Mom at all, no matter what, okay? Before he arrived in Virginia. But he beckoned his purring anger toward the light. How am I supposed to know how to act? He crossed his trembling arms. None of us knew he was going to leave us. Like, out of nowhere, Mom started bawling. What's going on? Darren unfurled his arms and spread them like wings. You can't pick a fight with me and then start crying. Darren. Meredith stepped over and grabbed his elbow, pulled his arm back. Calm down. He jerked his arm, but Meredith kept hold. He took a step away from her, and she stepped with him. Mom sobbed. Stop it, Meredith hissed. The love of her life just died. Mare, he said through gritted molars. What about? Stop being a brat, Darren. Mom sniffed, a wadded paper towel in her hand. You've always gotten away with it, but now it stops. He didn't feel anything when he heard that. Like Mare's hand had left his arm, like his heart had gone still, and all senses except sight had lifted away. Mom slurped her gin and set her empty glass on the counter. His voice crept back. What do you mean? She frowned deeply, as if a disgust she had never expressed was spreading over her tongue. Christmas, the year you turned 7, you never said Merry Christmas to me. You wanted one of those awful mutated teenage turtle figures, and I wouldn't get it for you because I thought they'd make you violent. You scorned me the whole day, even mumbled what sounded like you didn't love me. What? Darren remembered a Christmas with no Ninja Turtles, Dad arguing with Mom in the kitchen, then Dad and Darren getting in his truck, driving to a lookout on a ridge above the city, and Dad telling Darren that if Mom asked, they had a serious talk, and he was very sorry. Had that been over Ninja Turtles? The smell of the stale beer Dad drank filled the car at the lookout, and he gave Darren a tiny sip when he got thirsty. Darren hated it, asked why Dad drank it instead of soda. Dad laughed and called Darren Buddy, and after that, Dad started asking Darren to come with him when he wouldn't ask Mom and Meredith, even to the store or to do yard work. That's really where their father-son camping trip started. At a gravel pull-off, watching the city glimmer beneath them while Mom and Mare frosted overcooked holiday cookies at home. Your father spoiled you, Mom said, her eyes hooded in shadow as she drank. The empty gin bottle glistened and Meredith's hand tightened on Darren's arm. Mom, are you being serious? Has that really defined our relationship for the last 14 years? An unsettling calm spread over his mind. Has it? She inhaled sharply through her nose. You haven't even bothered to ask how I'm feeling. I asked you yesterday. You said you were miserable. When I brought it up, it seemed to make you feel worse. Her chin shook again as she picked up the wadded paper towel. You didn't ask like you meant it. He tensed his hands into and out of fists and tried to calm his voice. Mom, everyone in the goddamn city knows how you're feeling. You've been loud enough for them to hear you in the International Space Station. Meredith squeezed his arm, but said nothing. Mom cried again, more from anger this time, the tears making her voice quake, but not stopping her. I didn't even get that horrible thing for you, and you acted like that. She sniffled and let out half a laugh. Then you turned out like this. In his peripheral vision, Darren could see Meredith react at the same time he did. They both took a step back from their mother, eyes on her. Mom blew her nose, got a new paper towel, and tugged open the fridge door. Meredith spoke first. I think that's enough. This is going nowhere, and Uncle Gene will be here for lunch. Meredith, their mother said as she pulled a half-empty bottle of white wine from the fridge. Did you not hear me before when I told you to shut up? Meredith went pale. Darren felt a sensation like a hollow bone cracking open between his lungs and releasing sweet, burning marrow that shook into his nerve endings, filled him to his toes and fingertips. Stop! He bellowed straight into his mother's face. He hadn't even realized Meredith had let go of his arm and he had come around the counter within striking distance of Mom, and there was a ripped open note in his voice that scared even him. Mom's bracelets clanged like church bells as she slapped Darren across the face with a strength he never would have expected from her thin arm. His whole head was tossed to the side and his ear echoed with a high-pitched static as the spots where her heavy rings had connected throbbed like cut skin across his cheek. He heard Meredith hyperventilating behind him and a chair squeak across the linoleum floor, then a soft whoosh as Meredith dropped into the plastic seat. Mom yanked the loose cork from the clear bottle, picked up her gin-glazed tumbler, and filled it with wine. Darren turned to Meredith, her lips almost blue and eyes unfocused. He walked back around the counter to her. It's okay, Mare. Calm down. Don't have an attack. Her shaking breath slowed as she shrank her mouth into a tight O. She looked at Darren with tears in her eyes, her cheeks puffed, then hollow, puffed, then hollow. Mom slammed a few drawers and pulled out a box of crackers. As she ripped it open, she tore the plastic bag within the box, crushing some crackers to dust and sending others flying. Your sister's right. Your relatives are on the way, and if you can't pull yourself together enough to be around them, you should leave. Darren's face grew hot where his mother had slapped him. I need to pull myself together? Mom gave Darren that ugly frown again and slammed cabinets and drawers as she pulled out a plate and her loudest silverware. Fine, he said. Fine. He went across the house to his old bedroom. The few things he had pulled out of his duffel got stuffed back inside, a fist holding them down as he zipped it closed. He walked across the kitchen and set his bag by the door to the back porch. Meredith was sitting in the same chair, a bologna sandwich now in front of her, chewing what looked like the first bite and staring at the flowered tablecloth. Mom looked out the window over the sink, her back to Darren, and swirled the tumbler below her face. He pulled his winter jacket from the hooks by the door as Mom spoke. So that's it? You're leaving the family like this? Mom, you asked me to leave. I did not. Crystalline liquid splashed onto the counter as she smacked the tumbler down beside the sink. I asked you to be nice. She took a deep breath. I asked you to behave. I think we both need a little time. I'm going to give it to us whether you like it or not. His knees felt weak, so he put his palms on the counter and leaned in. She turned to him, that frown still there. Her eyes shined like the bottles on the counter beside her. As usual, huh? She forced a grim smile and turned back to the window. He swallowed down the wet quiver in his throat and reached over the counter for the one thing he had promised himself he would take when he left. The spatula Dad had always used, even on camping trips, the one with the wooden handle that had soft spots from Dad's fingers and James carved into it in cursive. Darren knew every line of both the carving and the wood grain after years of it hanging from Dad's camping pack. Dad had even let Darren use it to turn the meat a few times while he had a before-dinner beer, both camping luxuries because Mom couldn't comment on Dad's drink nor fret about Darren standing close to a fire, and Meredith couldn't insist on also getting a turn at the burgers. Darren gently slid the spatula out of the white ceramic jar crowded with other utensils. Mom's head snapped in his direction as he held the spatula to his chest. No. Her voice dropped to a harsh whisper before she spoke again. You can't take that. Tears filled his eyes. I only want this, nothing else. You can't have it. She hadn't moved and her eyes were open wider than he'd ever seen before. They looked like dark sparks, not the eyes he had known his whole life. He spun and reached for his bag. He heard her glass shatter across the floor at the same time he felt her nails dig through his down coat. You can't have it. She pulled his shoulder toward her and grabbed the spatula with both hands, a few of her fingers crushing into his. Meredith seemed to barely notice, still chewing the same bite. Mom yanked at the spatula and screamed, you can't, you can't, you can't, louder than anything else so far. Darren let go, and as Mom stumbled backward, landed legs overhead on the floor behind Meredith, both fists gripping the spatula sideways beneath her chin. He lifted his bag and threw the door open, ran out, and didn't stop even when his duffel caught on the doorknob. He jogged down the driveway to the used car he had bought himself and left behind when he went to college that year. His vision was soft-edged as his breathing stabilized. Mom stumbled and sobbed out the door. "Darren Alexander, get your ass back here." He heard her feet hit the driveway behind him, and he turned as she swung an arm straight down at his head. He raised his own arm, caught hers, and the beast within Darren howled when he saw that she'd swung at him with the spatula. His lips curled back from his teeth. "Don't you dare." She glared. "Dare what? Bring up the past? Tell you the truth?" His anger whimpered deep in him, and he burned flush. He pushed her arm back and stepped away from her, the tender bones in both his fists aching. Meredith appeared outside, skin still sallow. "Can't you just show me some sympathy?" A string of spit cast off from Mom's lips, and her voice was a rasp. "I lost my husband." The flush feeling spread down across Darren's chest, and his heart erupted with fire as he looked into her narrow, bloodshot eyes and steadied his voice. "I know that." The animal inside Darren lifted its head along his throat as if to emerge more fully. He swallowed against his dry mouth and continued in a near whisper so the neighbors peeking out their windows wouldn't hear his anger speak. "My dad is gone now too, but I understand your own grief might keep you from realizing that." The air went out of Mom, and every bit of angry tension in her face disappeared into a wide, yawning sorrow that drank her right up. She started to cry again, quiet, honest tears, and buried her face in her hands. The spatula stuck out from her fist ridiculously. Meredith stepped toward them. "Mom?" Darren turned on his heel, tossed his duffel into the passenger seat from the driver's door, and backed the car down the driveway without another word being said by any of them. On the drab hospital walls before him, Darren's mind projected flashes from across his childhood like a TV changing channels. He saw an image of his parents smiling at each other in a restaurant, my 16th birthday, or my 15th, when the guy my age who worked there wouldn't stop staring at me and gave me a free dessert. Darren's mind rattled off an untitled list of other birthdays and the memories attached to them, overwhelming waves of lost and forgotten moments from all over Darren's life, and he stifled tears with a deep breath. The untamed animal within him showed teeth and howled as Darren flexed all the muscles he could to hold it within him, to catch its ankle before it leapt from his mouth to say what he couldn't. His mind pulled forward images of places where Darren could never see his father again. Playgrounds, the skating rink, camping spots, Mom's house. Darren's arms twitched into the air as he tried to hide his face. His mother mistook his movements for an attempt at a hug. She whimpered and stood so she could clutch him as close and uncomfortable as Laura had when he had awakened the day before. "I love you so much, Darren." Darren groaned, gritted his teeth, his spine and limbs lifted from the bed, bones jammed together in now unfamiliar ways, the thin cushion of his depleted muscles communicating every pressure as pain. His breath escaped as his mother squeezed him close. She gasped quietly before she lowered Darren and slipped her arms from beneath him, same as she had when he'd slept in a crib. "Sorry, I wasn't thinking." She bit her cheek and sat. Darren's chest expanded, a sensation that brought to mind burning edges of paper across the sore ligaments and muscles of his back. "It's okay." He heaved another breath, and the burning edge under his skin spread, glowing bright and revealing something new beneath the ash. "You didn't mean to." Darren's cramped lungs rushed to fill, and the burning sensation spread, glowing below his skin, everything in him lighting up like a forest in need of renewal, like a house begging to be rebuilt. Thank you. And so we're going to take a little 5-minute break, and then we will come back for the Q&A. Thank you all so much. We'll see you in 5.
So we'll come back around 5:52 for questions.
Sorry, I keep waving to people, but no one can tell who I'm waving to. So then everyone waves back. I've waved to you all, I promise. I promise.
I was just gonna say that. I was gonna say, who are you waving to? You're waving to everyone, right?
You know me, waving to everyone, as usual. Thank you, everyone, for your kind comments. I really appreciate it. And thank you, Doris, for being here. I love you, Doris.
So we'll come back together. As we're coming back together, I just wanted to comment. I think this was all beautiful, but and amazing and tense, and the grief that you express in these characters is so true to life. I just really felt that. I just love the phrase. I think this was the phrase you used. But as he's waking up from his coma, his long dream, the smell of percussion. I love the mixing up of senses in that part of your work. It's just very well imagined, if not actually lived.
Yeah, that's not lived. That's not lived. Thank
No.
you. Thank you. I really wanted to insert some synesthesia in there as like his senses or his sensory information is changing, right? And like the sensory input is changing. And I actually I have a friend who has synesthesia, who was born with synesthesia. And so I had spoken to her about some of that. And yeah, thank you so much, Val. I always read that line and go, people are going to read that and think I'm insane. People are going to be like, what is wrong with this man? So thank you. I deeply appreciate it, that it
Great.
actually makes sense.
It does make sense. It's great, wonderfully placed, and um connects with what follows so well.
Thank you.
So we are a small group here left this evening. Please feel free to turn on your mic if you have a question you'd like to ask. Dave has his hand raised if you want to go ahead.
Yeah. Hey, it was fantastic, very moving. And I really I felt the characters. I they were real, they're human beings. Um, so I really was, it's really really fantastic. I want to read the whole book now.
Thank
Um, but I wanted to ask you what just to expound a little on the method for how you created these characters. They're
you.
especially the mother. She could be in my family.
She's an amalgam of many different people. um, yeah, just yeah. So I love that question because this story actually started. I can pay homage to Max. I had a friend in Santa Fe. His name was Max. He has since passed away. He passed away a few years ago. He drowned. He slipped by a swimming pool and drowned. But Darren is actually based off of him. He fell from a second-story apartment balcony, while he was at a party, and he landed on a sidewalk. And he was just telling me this as we got to know each other. And he then dreamed while he was unconscious. He said seamlessly. He didn't even realize that in the coma dream, he stood up from the sidewalk and continued his life. And so he thought everything kept going. He had gotten on a fishing boat and traveled to China and was living in China on this fishing boat. And suddenly he woke up in the hospital with his mother over him. And he said, "How did you get to China?" And she went, "What are you talking about?" And so I started asking him questions about it, and I realized I needed to stop because he had this look in his eyes where I realized it was still real to him and that world very much still existed. And his eyes actually flickered in a way that made me go, "Oh, he's wondering if this is the same thing now." And that was so interesting to me, that idea of this split world and this split life. And then that made me think of being gay and being queer and having to live this double life and having one foot in each world, and sort of inhabiting that third space that's between the two. So yeah. And generally that's how my work starts, that I hear an interesting experience or notice something interesting about someone, and then the rest sort of builds from there. And so a lot of the mom was fleshing Darren out and then seeing what sort of mother would have raised a person like that in my mind. And so yeah, then she sort of came together. It was really Darren, then Meredith. Well, Darren, Laura, then Meredith, and then the mom came along. Yeah.
Thanks. That's really great.
Thanks. I appreciate it so much.
Susan, you have your hand raised.
Yes, hi. Thank you very much for the reading. You added some insight into what I wanted to ask you about.
Oh, great.
And that is, I'm wondering if you develop characters or storyline first. In other words, do the characters tell the story, or do you find you need characters to fill your storyline?
For me,
and maybe it's not even just for this book specifically, but in general as a writer.
Okay, cool. When I was going to say it actually shifts and changes. It depends on the piece. Sometimes I see a really interesting thing that's just sort of an image that I find really interesting, and I think about it until it leads to a story. Sometimes I meet someone interesting, or like with Max, have somebody with this experience that's just like, whoa, and it just fascinates me. It's about what grabs my interest. Sometimes it's plot, sometimes it's character, sometimes it's an image, sometimes it's just a final ending image, and I write the piece to figure out how I get there. And so that's especially how I work in Flash. I normally write Flash sort of backward, where I start with the ending and then go back to the beginning and feel my way through the middle. And that's actually something a lot of authors do. I think it's John Irving. I'm pretty sure it's John Irving. When he spoke at AWP, he said when he writes his novels, he writes the end of each chapter first, and then he goes back to the beginning of the chapter and fills it in. So he always knows where he has to get to. And he said he does that because if he plods along chronologically, everything is too boring and makes too much sense. But if he writes the end first, he says, what is the most unlikely thing that can happen? And then that's what he writes as the end of the chapter. And so then he has to find his way there through extremely unlikely circumstances, which is, of course, what we all want to read. You know what I mean? We don't want to read about someone's normal day. We want to read about the day that's different. And so, yeah, absolutely. Thanks for being here, Susan. I feel bad. I saw that Brian Sanford had to go.
He has a question about where you think of your characters. Are you in nature or at a desk?
Oh,
Plot and characters. So
I don't have a good answer for that one. So everywhere. I actually have my little notes app on my phone has about 7 different stories going right now, and it has I have one note in there that where I just write down interesting things, where I just write down details. If I see somebody with green hair in 3 ponytails, you know what I mean, then I'll jot that down on there. Anything that catches my attention, because it's everywhere. Like life is always going on. And when I was in college, we were always encouraged to carry little notebooks and a pen all the time, which is also a great habit, but it's a little harder. And I find that the notebooks get damaged and fall apart and you forget your pen one day. And so I also think phones are great because you can take pictures of things that inspire you as well as write them down. And, you know, especially like in New Mexico, the landscape is so phenomenal and so hard to describe that I'll normally take a picture so I can then look at it later to try to find the right words, because they rarely come to me while I'm looking at it. So yeah, everywhere.
great. Thanks for sharing all that. Bridget, you have a question?
Yeah, I just kind of along the same lines as Susan and David, just because you know how I've been gotten the writing bug since we've known each other and since I've been at liberal arts. And so I've really started to do a lot of what you said, but also trying to pull other things besides just, you know, the true events, and really focusing in on more, like you said, interesting things that people want to really hear about, read about. Because when you're reading something, you want to read something that's a page turner, right? That's going to get you motivated to like find out what happens in that next chapter or that next session or whatever it is. So these are awesome ideas, and thank you so much, because I never thought of like visual, of like taking pictures like you just said, and you know, utilizing that for words, because our landscape is just, it's different, and until you take a picture, it's really hard to describe, you know, just by your memory or by what you wrote down in your notes. So thank you.
And especially like the colors, right? The colors of the landscape and sunsets around here are so mind-bending sometimes that you just have to record it so you can look back and be like, no, that's an accurate description. It really was fuchsia. It was not just like red or purple. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah. And our sky is so big. You get such a beautiful variety of colors in the sky itself. Yeah, I found it's very helpful to do that.
Right, between the seasons and the dust.
I-
It's just right, all the things that make everybody sneeze, but
yeah.
it really does you know, appeal to the eye, and so whatever appeals to the eye is also going to appeal to our other senses.
Yeah, well, and that's one thing I tell my students, like, you always want to write through all 5 senses, because that's how we experience the world, is through all 5 senses. But we obviously use certain ones more than others. Normally, taste doesn't really make its way into stories, which is fine. It's the most rarely used sense. We don't need it all the time. But that also, I think, makes it really striking when you can come up with a way to use it, just saying. But stories are partially so visual because we are so visual, because our eyes are what drives so much of our understanding of the world and intake of information. And so it really is a visual medium in a certain way. It's obviously not a literal visual medium, but there's a way in which it's really closely married to that, because it has to be, because it's how we understand the world. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, I'm also a very, very visual person. So that's probably one reason why I take pictures, because I just like to take pictures and look at things. I'm sure, you know, my husband is much more auditorily attuned. I'm sure that if he got into writing, he would probably be a little bit more inspired by like listening to people speaking other languages or something like that, because he's just more tuned in with his ears, I think. And so, yeah, that's one other thing I always want to say with questions about process. Never trust anyone else's process too much. Get ideas from them, glean from them, try it out, but never be like, this worked for Tommy Orange. Why won't it work for me? Because you're not Tommy Orange. It doesn't need to work for you. It needed to work for him. You need to find something else that will work sometimes, you know? And so don't be afraid to experiment and try other things. One other thing with the phone, it's just popping in my head now that I brought it up. Your voice memos. Remember that you can take voice memos. So if you have something in your head and you're like, oh, that is the perfect way to say it, just turn on the voice memo and you can record it real quick and then keep on doing what you're doing without sort of having to sit down and write the sentence down. You know what I mean? You can keep rolling with it. Yeah. I've also been doing this thing. As I'm thinking of notes on my phone, every day in November, I challenged myself to write one really, really good sentence every day. And that's all I have to do. That's the whole commitment, but it's a note in my phone. And so when the sentence comes to me, I just pull my phone out and I can type it in. And that's been a lot of fun. And I've had certain days where obviously that one sentence turned into a short story, or, you know what I mean? I did several of them about different things. And one or two times I've gone, oh, that is a really good sentence. Oh, damn. It's been nice. It's like increased my confidence and it's been a good exercise. And it's been good to see it constantly, to look back at it every single day and sort of remember how far I've come through the month. Yeah. Oh, thank you so much, Margaret. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
All right. Anything else?
Yeah, anything else? Cool. I was afraid you all were going to ask me a bunch of questions about publishing novels, and I was going to have to talk about how I haven't published my novels, so I can't answer those. So thank you for keeping it to non-publishing questions. Sorry about that.
And thank you for sharing your work. Thank you for inspiring us. This has been a multi-layered experience, I think, for most of us. And so I just really appreciate the time you've given us. And I know there's time to prepare, and we will be supporting you on your journey to get this published. It's a really exciting piece. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Val. I really appreciate it. Thank you for being here, everybody.
Thank you, Austin. That was amazing.
Thanks, Joseph. I appreciate it.
See you later.
Bye.